Welcome back to the vault. I am the Warden. Tonight I have unlocked something that has waited in the dark for nearly a century, sealed not by lock or chain, but by the mercy of human ignorance. The Call of Cthulhu by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. You will understand when it is finished why certain men choose silence over truth, and why that choice is the last sane one available to them. There is a particular species of horror that does not leap at you from the dark. It builds. It accumulates piece by piece, document by document, until the architecture of everything you thought you understood about the universe collapses under the weight of what has been revealed. Lovecraft did not invent monsters. He invented the feeling of realizing that the monsters were here long before us, that they are incomprehensibly vast, and that our entire civilization, every empire, every religion, every philosophy, amounts to a thin crust of ice over an ocean of absolute darkness. He wrote this story in 1926, when he was 36 years old. He had been thinking about it for years. The ideas had been gathering in him the way dread gathers, slowly, quietly, until the weight of them could no longer be contained. It was published in Weird Tales in February 1928. The magazine paid him less than $30 for it. For that price, Lovecraft handed the world a mythology that has not stopped growing in the nearly 100 years since. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a modest study in Providence, Rhode Island. The year is 1926. A man sits alone at a desk surrounded by papers that do not belong to him. The files and boxes of a dead professor, his uncle, a man of science whose death was perhaps not as natural as the physicians believed. Among those papers is a locked box. Among the contents of that box is a clay bas-relief unlike anything the world of scholarship can identify. And carved into that clay, in symbols that belong to no known civilization, is the outline of something that should not exist. The door is open. The dark is very deep. Begin. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1926, with the death of my granduncle, George Gamble Angel, Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages at Brown University. A man widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions, whose passing at 92 might have been unremarkable had not the circumstances of it been so peculiar. He had been stricken in the street, witnesses said, after being jostled by a nautical-looking man from one of the dark courts near the waterfront. Physicians found no visible disorder. I, as his heir and executor, thought little of it at the time. Latterly, I have thought of very little else. Among my uncle's effects, I found a locked box, the key to which was concealed in a ring he always carried. Inside were two things: a bas-relief of clay and a manuscript he had titled, in careful block letters, Cthulhu Cult. The bas-relief was roughly rectangular, 5 by 6 inches, and obviously of recent origin. But its designs were not recent. They carried in them a cryptic regularity that belongs to no known school of art, no civilization, ancient or modern. Above a mass of apparent hieroglyphics rose a figure, pulpy, tentacled, scaly, winged, that my imagination could only approach as something between an octopus, a dragon, and a desecration of the human form. Behind it, barely suggested, loomed a cyclopean architectural background that made the figure seem, somehow, small. The manuscript was divided into 2 sections. The first concerned a young sculptor named Henry Wilcox, who in March of 1925 had arrived at my uncle's door bearing a clay bas-relief, still damp, still fresh, that he claimed to have made in a dream. Wilcox was a precocious and eccentric youth, known in the art circles of Providence for his strange imagination and stranger visions. He called himself psychically hypersensitive. The staid citizens of the city called him merely queer. He told my uncle that on the night before his visit there had been an earthquake tremor, and that in his sleep he had dreamed of cyclopean cities of Titan blocks dripping with green ooze, and had heard from some undetermined point below a voice that was not a voice, a chaotic sensation he could only render as the syllables Cthulhu Fatagan. My uncle was a scientist, not a mystic, but those syllables unlocked something in his memory. He began questioning Wilcox with an intensity the young man found alarming, asking about cults, secret societies, arcane affiliations the sculptor had never heard of. When it became clear Wilcox knew nothing of these things, my uncle demanded daily reports of his dreams instead. For weeks, the young man came and went, describing always the same terrible vistas of dark, dripping stone, always hearing the same subterranean voice repeating variations of those impossible syllables. Then, on March 23rd, Wilcox failed to appear. He had been stricken with fever in the night and taken to his family's home in delirium, raving of a gigantic thing miles high that walked or lumbered in his dreams. He recovered on April 2nd, fully and suddenly, with no memory of anything since March 22nd. His strange dreams had ceased entirely. My uncle's notes revealed something more disturbing still. During that same period, between March 23rd and April 2nd, the precise window of Wilcox's delirium, Professor Angel had been collecting dream reports from an extensive circle of correspondence. The results were uneven but suggestive. Average people reported nothing unusual. Scientists reported vague unease, but from artists and poets came answers of a deeply disturbing character. Dreams of the same vast, dark city, the same sense of terrible pursuit, the same half-heard syllables. One architect, widely known and respected, went violently insane on the very date of Wilcox's seizure, and died months later screaming to be saved from something he would not name. The second section of the manuscript concerned events 17 years earlier, 1908, when the American Archaeological Society met in St. Louis. A police inspector named John Raymond Legrasse had traveled from New Orleans bearing a stone statuette of unknown origin, captured during a raid on what he had been told was a voodoo gathering in the Louisiana swamps. What his men had found was something altogether different. The statuette, 7 or 8 inches of greenish-black stone worked into a shape of vaguely anthropoid outline, tentacled, winged, squatting on a pedestal of undecipherable characters, was passed from scholar to scholar with growing alarm. No known school of art had made it. No known material composed it. Its age was unmistakable and incalculable. One man alone in that assembly recognized something in the monstrous shape. Professor William Channing Webb of Princeton, who had decades earlier encountered a degenerate cult of Eskimos on the Greenland coast practicing rituals of appalling character, identified the statuette as kin to the fetish those people had worshipped. He had taken down phonetic notes of their chant. Inspector Legrasse had done the same from his Louisiana prisoners. When the two men compared their records, a moment of awed silence fell over the assembly, for the phrases were, in all essential particulars, identical. Two cults separated by thousands of miles of ocean, unknown to each other, chanting the same words to the same nameless thing. What those words meant, several of Legrasse's prisoners had been willing to say. In his house at Relier, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Legrasse described in full what his men had found that night in the Louisiana swamps. 20 officers pushing through miles of black cypress forest, following the distant beat of tom-toms and the red glow of flame. What they discovered in a natural clearing, a grassy island in the swamp, was beyond anything in their experience of human depravity. Naked figures braying and writhing around a great ring-shaped bonfire, at the center of which stood a granite monolith 8 feet high, and on top of the monolith, small and yet somehow commanding everything, the carven statuette. From the scaffolds surrounding the clearing hung, head downward, the bodies of squatters who had vanished from the surrounding settlements. Inside that ring of corpses and fire, the worshippers moved in endless ritual between the dead and the flame, chanting the words that should never have survived whatever age first spawned them. The prisoners, when questioned, spoke of the great old ones, beings who had come to the young world from the stars in unimaginable epochs before man existed. They were gone now, inside the earth and beneath the sea, but they were not dead. They lay in the great sunken city of Relier, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu, waiting for the stars to come right again. When that time came, the great priest Cthulhu would rise from his dark house beneath the waters and reclaim the earth. The cult had always existed to keep that faith alive, to maintain the memory of those ancient ways, to be ready when the call came. One prisoner, an aged mestizo named Castro, spoke of a time when the stars would be right, when mankind would become as the great old ones themselves, free of law and morality and reason, reveling in a world made new by fire and by ecstasy. Then the liberated old ones would teach them things, new ways to shout and kill and revel. All the earth, he whispered, would flame with a holocaust of freedom. I was still a rationalist when I completed my study of these papers. I went to Providence to rebuke young Wilcox for what I had decided was an elaborate imposture practiced on an aging scholar. I found him genuine. I found his honesty complete and his dreams unfeigned. I visited New Orleans and confirmed Legrasse's account. I found the statuette, still in the inspector's possession, and studied it with a chill I could not entirely suppress. The cult, as Castro had claimed, was entirely secret, with no trace in any academic literature. One thing I began to suspect. and which I now fear I know, is that my uncle's death on that narrow waterfront street was not natural. The nautical-looking man who jostled him, the mixed blood and marine pursuits of the Louisiana cult members, the seaman in Norway who saw things and is now dead. I think Professor Angel died because he knew too much, or because he was likely to learn too much. Whether I shall go as he did remains to be seen. I have learned much now, and somewhere beneath the black water, in the sunken city of Legrasse, something waits. Something that is not dead. Something that is dreaming. The door is closed, for now. What you have heard tonight is only the first document in this particular transmission. The cult, the clay, the dreams, the chant, the thing that waits beneath the water. Part 2 will take you to the sea, to the place where Legrasse rose briefly from the deep, where men landed on its shores, where something opened a door. If you wish to be present when I unlock that door, subscribe to the vault. Part 2 has already been prepared. You will not want to miss it. Until then, stay in the dark.